what are the top 10 tips to really kind of go for when you start a FPL season. The most common thing has always come out is create a watch list for yourself. But it's something where you are going to put these players you are interested in. Those are the players you're going to kind of keep a track on for a defined period of game weeks. What is your definition, and how far is it from the one which I just mentioned?
To consider that as much as you can do to kind of outsource that to something else to free up your brain space for that actual decision making is something that's really useful. So instead of having to remember all the options all the time, having them just written down at all the different price points makes it really easy to then juggle between different structures and think about who you might upgrade to or drop down to as you make different things. So I think it's a really good exercise.
Just a question on Ward straight away. If Fofana was to leave Leicester, is Ward still a good low point entry to Leicester?
For sure. If you've got he looks like he'll be the only 4 million goalkeeper who's likely to potentially play. So he should be in your team, as your second keeper almost certainly. So then the only question is whether he's just there as a backup who might go up in price a bit to an Edison who you're going to start every week, or a Ramsdale, or is there a way to actually use him as a playing keeper? As you make a good point around Fofana, if he goes, then Leicester's defense maybe weakened a little bit. They don't look like they're in great shape coming into the season, but I'd still probably find that price point really appealing, that value, and look at the potential to therefore have 3 Arsenal players or 3 City players, or at least leave myself the option to do that in other positions as well. That would be another perk to that combination. So where are you sitting at with the keepers?
As of now, it's Ramsdale for me. It's because they have the best fixtures. As of now, I have a non-playing goalkeeper. Obviously now Ward straight away goes into it as the second slot. But yeah, my first goalkeeper as of now is Ramsdale. Between Edison and Alisson, why Edison and not Alisson? Is it because of obviously 3 Liverpool attacking slots?
Yeah, I think the Liverpool outfield options I prefer more. So I wouldn't want to waste one on Alisson because he'd be great. But there's definitely that to consider. Whereas City's midfield is a bit of a midfield minefield. So Edison with Cancelo and Haaland or something like that would be, I'd say, preferable out of those two.
Right. And Ramsdale over Mendy, it's quite clear because things are not really... It's quite shaky at Chelsea right now. Not sure who's going to come in. If there are too many people coming at the back line, they haven't really got the time to really settle down. Pope, not really.
Yeah,
Pope at 5.
I like Pope. I play a draft league with my mates where every player can only be owned by one person. So that's a different format, which actually helps a lot for FPL because you do have to cast a wider net and pay more attention to a broader range of teams. And I picked up Pope in that draft. So I like him. I rate him as a keeper. I think he's obviously had some very high scoring FPL seasons with Burnley going back a few years now. So he can do it, but. To start with, I think they've priced the keepers really well relative to each other. Overall, the pricing is probably too cheap across the board, but as far as where the players sit next to each other, I think we've got a good decision to make here because, any of these different keepers on the page here there's a case for all of them, depending on what you can do with the money that you would save elsewhere. But yeah, I clearly prefer Ramsdale to Pope or Mendy just to start the season because Arsenal's fixtures are the best.
All right, let's take a look at the defenders. These are all starting from premium to mid to the budget. The defenders in white are the ones who are the only 2 centre backs in the whole watch list, and the rest are all wing backs, which is not a surprise, isn't it?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that piece of detail when I sent the list through to you, but seeing it there, it's pretty stark that football has moved on a lot over the recent years, where it's all about the wing backs and they're just so attacking in most modern teams. So that's where I think the points are. Obviously, looking at this, another point on the wing backs this season. So getting a big question I have at the moment is Robertson versus someone like Diaz from Liverpool, or some of the cheaper defenders. And one thing just about wing backs generally as well is I think the 5 subs rule is going to potentially have an impact on the wing backs, particularly from the big teams who are trying to manage their players for Champions League every midweek. I did a little sort of back of the envelope calculation a week or so ago, just wondering, if a team's up, 1-0, let's say Liverpool's up 1-0, the 60th minute mark passes. Do I want Robbo to stay on and keep attacking, or do I want him to potentially get subbed off for Tsimikas, who can come on and see out the game for 15 minutes or whatever? Am I losing more points by losing Robbo's attacking potential for that last part of the game, or am I gaining something by banking his clean sheet before Liverpool might potentially concede a goal? And the calculation was pretty clear that you want that player to come off. So as long as 60 minutes has passed, you want them to come off, because the other team's more likely to score than Robbo kind of is by himself.
Right.
And so for people like him and TAE, I think that's just an even bigger advantage this season, because I think that's how Klopp will manage those guys. I don't think there's many games where he won't start them. I think they've shown with a proper off-season they can play week in, week out, but I think he'll just clip their minutes at the end of some games once they're comfortable. But that's only further to their advantage, not losing those late clean sheets.
Cucurella, will he have the same attraction if he moves to Chelsea? Obviously, it's not yet happened, but if it does happen.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Again, things are changing quickly. When I sent you this list, it looked like he was going to City, where I had to have him on here. So the thinking behind this watch list was sort of players I would consider in the first 8 game weeks. There's other players who I definitely have my eye on this season beyond my first wild card, but who I haven't included here. And when it looked like he was going to City, I thought he's somebody who has to be on here, because it could be game-breaking value if he was starting regularly there. If he goes to Chelsea, I'd want to hear more about Chilwell's fitness situation. But Cucurella could also play on the left of the back 3, which mightn't be bad at 5 million at Chelsea. So it's a wait and see. But I included him on the list just because if certain if certain events play out, then he'd be one who could force his way into my thinking. But I certainly wouldn't start the season with him.
You don't have Gabriel here from Arsenal, I think, who's at 5. Obviously, I'm assuming it's because he's a centre back and he's not a wing back, and you have Zinchenko, which is that the thinking behind, in spite of the fact that he does score 3 or 4 goals from set pieces, and he starts against 2 teams who are pretty bad at set pieces, which is Crystal Palace and Leicester.
That's true. I'd force myself to pick one or the other for this list, although I think he would be a great option as well. So I think Zinchenko just edged it for me, because I think there's a fair chance that he could move up into midfield when Tierney gets back. I think he's a better player than Xhaka is. And I don't think he moved to Arsenal to sit on the bench. If he was going to be sitting on the bench, he'd be happy to do it at the Champions, right? So just for that potential that you sit on him for a few weeks and then all of a sudden he's playing as an 8 for Arsenal, where he would be again another must-have player for pretty much everybody. That's why I would prefer to start with him just in case.
For me, he's one of the assets who could see a 1 million kind of a price, right? Just like what I think Cancelo saw last year. He could easily become a 6 million by the end of it. Let's look into the midfielders. Obviously, this not surprised that this is the biggest list that we have. So you have KDB and not Son.
I'm just a little bit worried about Son's minutes with Richarlison there. So I feel terrible to disrespect him after he was great for me last season and scoring the earning the golden boot with Salah. But and I just, until I see how Conte is going to treat his minutes, not just to start the season, but once the Champions League starts as well, I just won't be confident enough to go to him. I prefer Kane as my Spurs option if I want to tap into their attack. So for now, it's just a wait and see with Son, just minutes wise. Whereas KDB, something like FPL Review isn't as high on him as it would be potentially on Son and Salah. But I think that's a situation where the model hasn't quite caught up with the tactical change, where his role is a little bit more attacking and closer to goal, and the link up with Haaland is potentially going to only boost his prospects as well. So if I was going to go to a 12 million midfielder, it would probably be crossing my fingers and swapping Salah out for a week or two to kind of chase the big captaincy hauls, and KDB would be the one that I'm going to. But otherwise I'm pretty much going to stick with Salah up around that bracket.
Fair enough. Maddison moving to Newcastle, if that was to happen, does he still, again, same question, just like Cucurella, does he still have the same attraction for us?
Yeah, and again, that's sort of a new rumor that's emerged since I put the list together. So I'd
because at Newcastle as of now, Trippier has been involved in most of the set pieces, whether it's a corner, whether it's a free kick, and Maddison again, he does the same. So it's going to be tricky. I
haven't checked Newcastle's fixtures towards the end of this 8-game week bracket. I certainly wouldn't be starting the season with him, and you'd want to wait and see exactly what his role is, how he settles, and all of those kinds of things. He could potentially be a really good option at Newcastle once the big teams start to potentially rotate a bit more. They're not in Europe, just like Leicester aren't, and that's why he was in my thinking at Leicester to start with. So yeah, it would be an absolute wait and see. And if I was drawing up this list again right now, maybe Saka would be in there ahead of him. But saying all that, I'm not sure you can go too far wrong with any of those 8 million options. Even though none are in my current draft. In saying that, just because of team structure. How about you? Which ones do you have?
As of now, obviously, I just made one draft, which was last week. It was a very casual draft. But I, as of now, have. Grealish. Now, after watching Foden, what he did in half an hour in the Community Shield, I would definitely. I'm looking to get him in. And 8 million spot kind of gives you the flexibility as well if you want to drop down to, let's say, though I have Rashford and Martinelli as well as of now. You can just shift to Luis Diaz and anybody else. Mount if the Chelsea was to start very, very strong. Maddison, yes, again. Leicester do play. If he stays in Leicester do have decent couple of fixtures. I think Brentford at home is the first one. Then they have Arsenal away, and then they have Southampton home. So if I were to go for any Leicester asset, if things stay like the way they are right now, I would rather go for Vardy, because he's the one who starts a season very, very strongly, usually, if he stays fit. But yeah, out of these, as of now, I have Rashford, Martinelli, Salah, and Grealish, and I have 4 at the back, and it's 4-4-2 as of now, but obviously it's going to change. I don't have Jesus right now, but I'm quite scared that every day his ownership is going up. Even if he does not kind of score in the first game, but you're making a team as of looking at the next 8 game weeks and not just the first 2. So that you got to be wary of that.
Yeah, he's the one for me where I kind of have him instead of one of these 8 million mids, whereas that's kind of how I see the option. But the only reason I prefer Jesus to a Saka, that is because the 4.5 million mid that you're going to get will be Andreas Pereira at Fulham, who's going to is potentially playable, whereas the 4.5 striker that you're going to get if you drop Jesus down is not really worthwhile. So just from a team structure point of view, that
absolutely. Stuart Armstrong at 5 million. Is it because he played as a striker in a couple of pre-seasons? Was that the reason? Because they also have kind of signed. I'm forgetting the name. They signed a new striker as well, a 19-year-old French guy. So
yeah, the 3-5 millions I've listed there. If I was starting with one, it would be Bailey. Depending on my team structure, if it was somebody who I really needed to play every game in the first 8 game weeks or the majority of those games, then I'd go for the safety of Dewsbury Hall, because if Maddison or Tielemans was to leave, he could probably get even more playmaking responsibilities and potentially set pieces. So he could be quite good and he's quite secure. Whereas I've included people on this list who I definitely wouldn't start the season with, but I've looked at the first 8 game weeks and the potential that they could be somebody who sort of forces their way into into thinking by proving really good value or having a good run of fixtures towards the end. And so that's why Zaha was there on the previous slide,
Right.
because Palace's fixtures are quite decent from game week 5 to game week 8, I think. And then Stuart
Correct.
Armstrong, yeah, exactly as you said, you've done your research too. And he was, it looks like he might play up front in a 3-5-2 that Southampton are switching to this season. And it's a player I'm a big fan of his, again, through that draft game. Those are the type of players you
Right.
need to really watch kind of closely. And so I think he's been really unlucky with injuries. Just as he gets up to speed, he seems to pick up a knock and drop back out again over the past few seasons. But I do think he's a cut above most of the players that are at Southampton, and he's got a really good eye for goal.
Right.
So if he was playing regularly in a front two, which I think is a role that he could do, then at 5 million as a midfielder, then he would clearly be part of our thinking.
I was asking the City fan who I spoke to yesterday, is Bailey going to be this season's Benrahma? What are your thoughts on that? Because Benrahma was on fire in the preseason, and he kind of continued with it for 3-4 games. Bailey is on same level. Bailey looks to be right in the good side of Steven Gerrard book.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And as I said to Zoff the other night, Aston Villa's preseason was down here in Australia, so I got to watch them closer than most teams, which I'm trying not to be biased by, but for sure I saw how good he looked and the impact that he had on that team. And we remember this time last year, Villa had sold Grealish and they'd spread that money around with a few big signings, and he came in with a pretty big reputation and pretty high expectations, and it was only really injury that kind of cut that short. So we need to remember the player that he can potentially be and that he was brought there to be, just because he didn't hit those heights last season. If we talked in the captain's pod about targeting Bournemouth, they've got Bournemouth in game week 1. If I think he scores in that game from 5 million, he could be up to 5.3, 5.4 after a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
That was similar to Benrahma last season. I actually brought him in for the sake of catching that price rise last season. If somebody's really going to go up that much, that could almost be worth thinking about. And
so Neto is clear for you, or was it Podence? Because Podence looks to be till the time Jimenez is back, Podence looks to be the number 9.
Yeah, that's true. I certainly don't mind if someone would prefer to go Podence to maybe protect against price falls or for some other reason. I'd be interested to know what the penalty situation is at Wolves with Jimenez not there. And if it goes down to Neves, for instance, there's some rumours that he might be, on the way out. With Vissa, they're very similar to what I said about Bailey with him coming in last season at Brentford. If you look at the signings that Brentford has made in their attack over the years, with Benrahma, we were talking about Neil Maupay and the guys that that they've sold, that they've pretty much bought in for 5 million and then sold for 30 million. This was their record signing. So you're thinking this guy's going to be worth 50 million in a couple of years, right? Knowing how good their Moneyball style recruitment is, and he scored 10 goals, I think it was, last season, even though he really didn't play that regularly for particularly early in the season. Again, just due to injuries. So that's somebody who I'm trying to just keep an open mind about the level of player when he was brought in there. Brentford don't tend to make bad signings, and so I think he has a lot of potential.
And I think he's done all right in the preseasons as well. I think he's got 2 or 3 goals with a couple of assists as well. And maybe Mbeumo being as a striker along just next to Tony might help Visa roam around a lot more. Just coming on to Pereira, Harry Wilson's injury and his absence, do you think Pereira, is it really going to affect your decision to play Pereira, or he's the only 4.5 midfielder who's expected to play the maximum minutes?
He is that default choice, but there'd be game weeks, and with my planning on thinking how deep my bench is, for instance, where I'd be trying to weigh up whether I want to play him or not. So I do want to think about what impact that might have on him. And it's a little bit like Neto with Jimenez out. It's, is that going to help him because he's more likely to play and maybe take, more free kicks or whatever it might be, and be relied upon to get those goals, or is it going to hurt him because the team's not as strong going forward? And
Correct.
similar with Pereira and Wilson, I can't say that I know enough about Fulham to predict that. I think he will play regularly and was already going to take probably the corners or potentially free kicks as well from the left-hand side, so that there's in-swingers from both sides. I didn't see that much in pre-season, but
Right.
maybe he goes to taking corners from both sides now, and that would potentially, Wilson's injury could potentially help him a little bit. But if Fulham a bit light now going forward and there's less goals there, then it goes the other way. So he'll definitely be in my team at this point, but then it's a little bit of a wait and see, I guess, to see how that impacts them.
Yeah, whenever Fulham's fixtures are, I think whenever they're playing a promoted team, definitely Mitrovic and the Pereiras of the world will definitely come into the playing 11. Moving on to the forwards now. 7 options, little better than last season. You can see Broja there, right there. Would he be still in contention if he stays in Chelsea?
Potentially.
Right.
I think Chelsea's. Again, this is not some of these guys are definitely not players I would start the season with.
Yeah.
So we haven't put the 4.5s on here because they're pretty much just bench fodder, but I'll have at least one of those. But I did want to include people on the list outside the usual ones that have been discussed who could
Right.
come into the frame before the first wild card. And Broja is, I think, one of those, because Chelsea's focus with their transfer spending and attention at the moment is all in their defence. They're looking at Correa, they're looking at Dumfries, I hear, and other centre backs. If Azpilicueta and Alonso leave, then they definitely need to get more bodies in there. And if it's just pretty much left to Sterling, Havertz, and Mount to play in the front three, it looks like Werner could leave as well. Broja could be somebody if Havertz doesn't score.
True.
Tuchel wants to have more of a traditional 9 in that position, then he could be it, right? We saw Tammy Abraham come back from a loan in the Championship a few years ago and come into Chelsea's starting team and become a real option.
Nothing much to talk about on Haaland, Kane, and Jesus. Martial, if whatever happens with Ronaldo, whether he stays, looks like he will stay. You never know. In the very last moment, he can go anywhere. When do you really get him? Does Man United fixtures really play a part in it, or is it really how Ten Hag really plays with Ronaldo and how he really kind of takes care of the whole Ronaldo saga?
Yeah, I think you summed it up well. It's a wait and see, at least until the transfer window closes, because we want to see whether Ronaldo stays or goes. And if he does go, I can't imagine them starting the season with just Martial as the only striker at the club. So then who's going to come in? I wouldn't be surprised to see someone like Depay leave for United or maybe Chelsea to come in as part of the tax. It's just a complete. I haven't even seen that as a rumor. Just looking at who's around and who might be available. But somebody could come in who's above Martial's level or at his level, and then we need to see what's happening with the selection. So it's very much just there as a wait and see. But again, if just like Broja, if we have a 7 million Manchester United striker, then that'll be a great option. And it's quite nice the way that his price just under Jesus there to be able to quite easily.
Right, absolutely. He would be 7 million in a United attacking is a very, very not happens very often. Even Rashford at 6.5 looks to be pretty attractive. It all depends on how Ronaldo is treated. Mitrovic, the last one. A lot of people again, are talking about whatever is fresh in their memory about what happened when he was in FPL last time. How much do you really give that factor of weightage?
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, and this is how I play the game. I try to do a lot of research and absorb as much information as possible, and try to stay quite adaptive and flexible with how I look at these kinds of things. And so I didn't follow the Championship closely, other than keeping track of how many goals he was scoring. But listening to the Fulham fans in pre-season, reading things, it sounds like his manager Silva is really building the team around him this time, whereas Parker didn't either trust him or trust a system that included him when they were up last time. So there's evidence there to say it should be different, right? Whereas if it was just looking like the same team, the same manager, the same problems, then I would give that information from 2 years ago much more weight. In saying all that, just because of the fixtures, he's not in my team at the moment for game week 1. So it's another option where it's really nice that we get the benefit of watching him for a few weeks and watching Fulham and seeing what level they're at, how they cope. But yeah, as you can see, this list is pretty thin. I haven't included any of the Bamfords and the Watkins and the Tonys and all of those guys at those higher price points than 6.5, purely because Mitrovic exists. And I would just prefer, I think he's, I would say, just as good an option as any of those guys. Not necessarily better, not necessarily worse, but he's cheaper.